You're listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, brought to you by the Raven Creek Social Club, where we talk about faith and other oddities. For questions, comments, or to be part of the conversation, join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find us at Raven Creek SC. Now for your hosts, Emily Dixon and Nathan Underwood.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Faith and Other Oddities, where we're reading your favorite children's Bible stories, but actually from the Bible, and finding out they're not for kids.
Not at all.
So we're going through it and seeing that it's weirder than you thought. I mean, really the version you hear when you're a kid's pretty weird, but the version when you actually read the Bible is even weirder.
Well, and especially if you really put all the pieces together and you don't read just sections of his story. And that's what I find most people do. They just want to read sections of his story. And when you put it together, you start to get this snowball effect of just how messed up Samson really is.
Yeah, it's like one layer of disaster on top of another.
And and everything goes back to Samson's bad decisions. And speaking of bad decisions, we left him off with the Philistine wife that he married because she was right in his eyes. And we talked about how that phrase is going to play in through the rest of the book. And so... and
we see Samson being kind of a microcosm of the entire nation here.
He really is, because if you look at the attitude of his father with the angel, and then Samson's attitude, there's a lot of connection and a lot of similarities. And Manoach, he really was supposed to represent, the average Israelite. And he was kind of normal for his time and culture. So we also talked about how Samson had killed the lion, which led for the basis of this riddle that he gives to the Philistine men. And of course, they can't solve it. There's no possible way anybody who wasn't there would know what Samson was talking about. So, he's cheating, basically. And
well, he needs to, and again, we talked about how he's taking an old joke and then changing the punchline. So basically is what's happening.
Precisely. And it's an old dirty joke. And if you want to hear about that, listen to last week's episode. So
what I think is really funny is he changed the punchline to something that's really not even funny.
It's not. But that's kind of Samson, adventures and missing the point. And that's kind of his whole life in a nutshell right there.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, what we do as readers is we tend to miss the point because we don't see how all this plays in. But we also, the other setup you need before we get into this is, the 30 men had been brought in. They're more of security guards than they're actually friends or companions, like the ESV translates it. So you really start to get this feel because when they approach the wife, or the bride, this is a good question. Is she his wife? Does she ever actually become his wife?
Did they actually get married?
Yeah, because, there's no record of the marriage being consummated. And in Judaism, if it's not consummated, it's not a marriage. And it's true even today under U.S. laws. But they...
Technically speaking,
just nobody bothers to investigate. So, which is a good thing.
I wouldn't want that job.
No. Things,
Let's move along from that.
Okay, so the guys go to the wife on the fourth day, and they demand that she finds out the answer to the question, and they threaten to burn her and her father in their house if she doesn't get the answer for them. And they even accuse her. It's like, you brought us to this place to make us destitute. And so they're accusing her of having this collaboration with the enemy.
Right.
And, you're doing this with this Israelite to make us Philistines look bad. And that was verse 15, by the way. So, because I forgot to mention that. And I guess we should say what chapter we're in. We're in chapter 14.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
you're all caught up now.
Exactly. And so this is the first time in verse 16, we get a feel for the woman. This is the first time she starts to speak, because before this, she has no voice. We don't know if she's happy about the wedding. We don't know if she wants this to happen. We just know this is the woman that Samson has chosen and taken. And we talked about that too. So in verse 16, Samson replies, basically, I didn't even tell my parents.
Right.
why in the world would I tell you? So he's not really seeing this as this is not a partnership that he's going for.
No. I think, given that, I would assume Samson is probably late teens, early 20s at this point. And so I figure he's probably not thinking about companionship and partnership. He's probably got other things on his mind.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, pretty much everything in Samson's life is about feeding his desires. It's about stroking his ego. It's about, what does he want right now? And he has no vision for the future. And I'm actually going to prove that here in a moment after I sneeze.
So, yeah. But no, and I think partly is, and I could be wrong about this, I do think, you have to look at the parents probably screwed up a little and probably told him that he was a special kid and he had a special purpose and he could do no wrong. And granted, you want your kids to have a good, healthy view of themselves. You don't want them to
right. Nice self-esteem.
Good self-esteem, but you don't want them to be arrogant. You don't want them to have so much self-esteem that they can't see their own flaws.
Well, and I think the other part of that too is Mama knew that he was in danger. And so when you put those two things together, an overprotective mom, a dad who has this overinflated sense of importance, and passing those things on to their child, what does that give you? That gives you a child who's messed up. Yeah. I don't think you can get around that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I see as I read this. And now, granted, I work in a school, so I might be bringing my own
your baggage to
own baggage to it.
Well, it happens, but it's
not that we have any of those parents at our school. Everyone there is wonderful.
And so on verse 17, after 7 days, Samson can't handle it anymore. She wears him down, and she's crying, and but he tells her the answer to the riddle. And it's interesting that the Bible specifically says she tells her people. So these guys who just threatened her are her people.
Right.
So we're being reminded she's not an Israelite. She doesn't fit in Samson's destiny as we would expect it to, but she is still very much the enemy.
Right.
And so, this is all foreshadowing of Delilah. You can almost match these stories up point by point, from the asking for the secret to the resistance, the initial resistance, and then being worn down with the tears and if you love me. And so we're really seeing that Samson is already blind. Even way before the Philistines gouge out his eyes, he's a blind man. So, and I know I'm giving away like a lot of the stuff that happens at the end, but I'm assuming everyone knows the story.
Yeah. If you're tuning in here, you probably read the whole story or have studied most of the. Well, you've probably heard how the story ends anyway, because that's what everyone wants to talk about is the good-ish things he does. So
wait until we get there.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, okay. So, but at the last minute, the men come to Samson and they ask him a riddle in return, and they said, what's stronger than a lion? What's sweeter than honey? And Samson, he's furious. He has been found out. He knows exactly what's happened. There's only one way these men would have the answer, and that's if his wife has betrayed him. And he comes back with a riddle. So he asks the riddle, the guys answer with a riddle, and then Samson comes back with the final riddle. And his riddle is, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. So I promised last week that we would talk about how this is also a dirty joke. I think I can keep it pretty clean.
So the sweeter than honey and stronger than the lion part, that's a riddle that they're asking him.
Yeah. But he knows it's in answer to his riddle.
Right.
So, yeah.
But is there an answer to their riddle?
No.
Okay.
Because Samson, he knows he's found out. And at this point, he just explodes.
Okay.
And he does come back with this kind of riddle of his own. And it is considered to be a riddle properly, that if you've not plowed with my heifer. And so, which is hilarious, because I can remember, and I don't know if I should say names, uncles of ours, you can edit that out.
We'll fix it later.
So anyway, uncles of ours laughing about this. Of course, they're in their early 20s when we were kids and thinking, why is that so funny? I don't understand. Well, number one, it's not polite to call your wife a heifer in any society. Just don't do it.
In case you were a little iffy on that.
Well, we're in Oklahoma. You call people heifers out here. That's just kind of normal.
But it's not polite.
It's not polite. So, but the second thing, the plowing is a metaphor. It's a euphemism.
Right.
And so he's saying some pretty derogatory things about his wife at their wedding.
Right.
And, if you don't like him already, then you're kind of catching on because he is starting to reveal who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the writer wants us to like him. I mean, because we aren't very far in his story as far as overall length of his story.
Right.
He's already refuses to obey God. He's disrespectful to his parents. He lies to his parents. He cheats with the riddle. He views his wife as property. And he calls her basically a slut at the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a great guy.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're not even close to done.
Yeah. This sounds like a terrible way to start a marriage.
Well, it's a terrible way to start a life. But despite all this, in the middle of this, and we're in verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon him. Now, if you remember back in the previous chapter in verse 4, God has been seeking an opportunity against the Philistines.
Mm-hmm.
Now he has one. God has one. And Samson's mad, and God just uses this fury and this anger to propel Samson. He goes to the city of Ashkelon, and that's about 25 miles away from where he is. So,
Okay.
A leisurely stroll here. And
Nothing for a guy like Samson.
right. But here's the other thing. They have absolutely nothing to do with what's going on.
Right.
They have no connection other than they're also a Philistine city. And he randomly kills 30 men.
Yeah. I don't like, I remember hearing this stuff and I remember reading about this stuff growing up,
Mm-hmm.
but let's just actually think about what the text just said there. He goes to a completely random city, kills 30 random strangers, steals their clothes to give to the guys who answered the riddle.
Right.
To pay off, he kills people to pay off his debt.
That he lost because
He was cheating.
Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. If you aren't kind of appalled by him, you should be. And because now add mass murderer to that list of things not to like about him.
Yeah.
And what kind of person is he that can do this? And he does. He gives it to the 30 men from the wedding. And then he returns to his father's house. And the wedding and the bride, they've all been forgotten. There's no mention of her. Samson's just stormed out. We don't know what's going on with her. Samson's still mad. But here's the thing. We know that when you return to the father's house, you aren't supposed to go home mad.
Right.
This is not the proper way to return to dad. And you're supposed to go ready to own your mistakes.
Yeah.
Ready to apologize for not listening to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not the attitude that Samson has at all. I mean, he's not the prodigal son. And he'd been told, you don't want to marry this girl. His parents had advised him against it. So
Like, I don't want to say I told you so, but yeah.
I told you so. Yeah. He's the entitled brat who thinks that he has some right to being accepted back home. But he has no self-control, no discipline. And the funny thing is, God says, I can work with that.
Right.
And this marriage that should have...
At least he's honest, right? Is that kind of well, he's not. Well,
no, he's not.
Anyway, so yeah, let's carry on.
Yeah. So, but this marriage that was supposed to unite these two nations, the Philistines and the Israelites, it becomes the reason for a war.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the last verse of this chapter, the narrator tells us that the woman that he had married was given to one of the companions at the wedding.
Right.
And this isn't to satisfy our curiosity. This is to set us up for what's getting ready to happen in the next chapter. And, Samson, he wanted to fit in with the Philistines, and he honored their customs. And he actually honored their customs more than he did the customs of his own people.
Mm-hmm.
But when he acts out in anger, now he's really destroying the opportunity he wanted. And he wanted to be a Philistine in so many ways. And so he's destroying his future with his own hands, literally.
Yeah.
So we're in Judges 15, and it opens up with some time later. We don't know how long he was gone. It could have been days. It could have been weeks. We know that it's the time of the harvest, and that's important. So hang on to that little tidbit. He's cooled down enough that he suddenly remembers, oh yeah, I've got a wife. And he goes to visit his wife, but we know that she's gone. She's not there. And, he's on the way to find her. He's got the young goat, which is, I guess, the equivalent of a box of chocolates from that day, She can forget that I stormed out of our wedding if I give her a dead animal.
Yeah. Storming out of a wedding, that's pretty significant. Your own wedding is pretty significant.
Yeah. And this is the thing. His temper is going to keep getting the best of him over and over again. And in his assumptions, because even here, he's making 3 assumptions. He's assuming he still has a wife.
Mm-hmm.
He's assuming that a goat's enough to cool her temper enough to have anything to do with him. And he assumes that he has the right to sexual favors, because that's really what he's there for.
Right.
He says specifically that he wants to go into her chamber. And so we know that this is what he's there for. This is not, honey, let's sit down and have a nice dinner and talk. He goes to her dad and demands entrance. He's a jerk. He's just a jerk. So, he's really got his entitlement mentality on display. And actually, her dad's a better person in this moment, because he has some kind of moral code. And he's like, it's not happening. She's married to someone else. I can't allow this to happen. And that's verse 2.
Yeah. No. I was reading through this earlier, and it's just like, it's so weird. And I don't know if it's like, because I think it's kind of odd that the dad did just go ahead and tell the best man, like, hey, you were all set up for a wedding. She wanted to marry somebody.
Yeah, here you go. Well, and marrying off a child or a daughter specifically at that point in time was a good thing.
Right.
Because, daughters they helped you gain alliances with other families, but you didn't want to keep them at home and support them and raise them. Even when they were great people to be around, you wanted them out of your house because they were another mouth to feed. Where sons, if they stayed home, then more workforce, more soldiers to help protect the family. Women did a lot of work then too, but there was also a lot more risk having women because they were targets of violence so often. And so they endangered the household on a certain level. So if you could get women out and not have a high concentration, that this was advantageous.
I brought this daughter here, and somebody's taking her home. Is that
pretty much?
I mean, it's so. I joke, but it's so foreign, the idea that
we are not from this culture, and I think
100% not from this culture.
Well, and I think when we read the Bible, we forget, and we want them to kind of rise to the standards that we've got in place today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, a wedding in our mind, if it goes over 2 hours, we're done.
I am.
They're on day 4.
Right. Day 7 by the end of this.
But
yeah.
It's nuts. I mean, but I guess, I don't know, part of me wouldn't mind having like 7-day celebrations about certain things in life.
7 days of feasting actually sounds pretty good to me.
I'd be okay with that.
As long as there's a place to take a nap in between courses, I'd be good.
Well, I'd assume, but I don't know, as long as it wasn't just like a potluck from our childhood that lasted 7 days, that wouldn't be fun.
Yeah.
So anyway,
moving on.
Let's carry on.
So Dad has the solution of, all fathers have a solution for their daughters. And the solution is take the younger one. She's better.
We've heard this before. Haven't we?
Yeah, we actually have. Kind of in reverse, though. It was
Rachel and Leah. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. And Dad is sounding more like a pimp here than a dad. And the thing was, this is to show you that this treatment, this kind of offering women as prizes and ways to placate your enemy, or even as, kind of selling them off to the highest bidder or whatever. This was something that was not to be done in Israel. Laban did it. He's not an Israelite. This guy's doing it, not an Israelite.
Right.
And so when we have Israelites acting like this, there's a problem. But the fact that we're seeing this with outsiders is to remind us, you don't get to do this in the Israelite culture. As a matter of fact, women got to refuse to marry a man they didn't. And we talked about that on the Isaac and Rebecca episode. So, at this point, Samson's pride's injured. We're in verse 3, and, someone's done him wrong. And
so there's more death.
More death. And he never acknowledges that he has anything to do with this. That he set these events in motion by, 1, picking a Philistine wife, and 2, by storming out of the wedding and killing 30 people.
Right.
He's the victim here. Mm-hmm. And he declares that he has a right to retaliate. And, he's innocent. And he takes this from a domestic squabble, what should have been something that was taken care of at the wedding. Mm-hmm. And he's going to elevate it to a national scale. And his stated target are the Philistines as the group, not his father-in-law, which is interesting. Why didn't he decide to take it out on the father-in-law who gave his wife away?
Right.
So this is one of those things where we have to ask again, is Samson marrying this girl as part of this grand plan to be able to attack Philistines? Is this him fulfilling his God-given calling on his life? Or is it him still acting in his own hubris?
I think it's him acting in his hubris, and God saying, okay, I made a promise that I was going to do great things with you, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean I can't use your own selfish intentions for something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we've got going on here. I mean, because I don't know. And of course, I don't think it's, I don't know.
God didn't ordain sin for his own glory.
I just don't think that happens. But we can talk about that later.
Right.
But I definitely think it sounds like Samson's just flying off the handle, and God's kind of just giving him a little nudge.
Really, I mean,
in the direction he wants him to go.
So often that's exactly what it appears to be going on, is Samson kind of decides, hey, I'm going to do this. And then God says, oh, we can just up it a notch. We can take it a little bit further. And so what we're getting ready to go into, this is really one of Samson's more famous exploits. This is where he gathers up the 300 foxes. And he sets them loose in the wheat field. And so many people know the story.
Yeah, we know this story. Yeah, he grabs 300 foxes, sets them in pairs, ties a torch between their tails. Mm-hmm. And okay, so we always we read through that really fast. It doesn't take a very long time to read through that. And we just kind of read past it and we're like, oh, okay.
That's weird.
But really think about how long this had to take. This isn't, I'm pretty sure he didn't do this all in one short fit of anger.
Right.
It had to have taken days.
Yeah.
And lots of calculating and lots of I don't even know.
How do you catch 300 foxes?
300 foxes. And then to take them around strategically to various locations,
tying their tails
together with a torch.
I mean, okay, so
just the methodical I don't know where this and what kind of this is like a toddler's idea about it.
No, you hit the nail on the head. So many of Samson's thoughts and attitudes and actions, they're toddlers, 100%. It's a 3-year-old in this massive body.
Mhm.
And so, but I've got to tell the story because I didn't think about it until the foxes. So our uncles again, we used to have these 2 tomcats in the milk barn.
Oh no.
And now you remember this. Dad would go and milk the cow, and then he'd always put some of the fresh milk in a pan for the 30 barn cats that we had.
Yeah.
And there were 2 rival tomcats that lived there, and they never would go around each other unless it was time to get the milk.
Right.
And so one of our uncles, I can't remember which one, got the bright idea to take some electrical tape and tape their 2 tails together while they were drinking their milk. They were fine until they got done and all the milk was gone. And then they realized that they were bound to their enemy. And these cats were 3 feet off the ground in the air fighting each other. It was the craziest thing you ever saw. It was like some kind of cartoon action. So when Samson trying to tie the tails of 2 foxes, this is the image I've got.
I don't remember that. That's crazy.
Probably before your time. I was probably 7 or 8 when it happened, but the image is as clear as day in my head. And the thing is, this is an awful story. This is a horrible, horrible story. I mean, these foxes, that they had these torches burning between their tails, and
animals are afraid of fire,
terrified. And did they get burned? Did they burn themselves in the grass? I mean, it's cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And under Jewish law, you're not cruel to animals.
Right.
You should never ever be cruel to animals. So okay, so some points that I want to pick out of this. Number one, it may not have been foxes. The word there could be foxes or jackals.
Okay.
And jackals kind of makes a little bit more sense because they run in packs.
Okay.
So catching 300 wouldn't be as difficult as 300 foxes. But in the end, it doesn't really matter because
quadrupeds with tails.
Pretty much. I mean, it's a superhuman feat because jackals, I mean, they could do some damage if you're trying to capture them. Ties them in pairs. Animals in pairs automatically makes us think of,
I don't know. What does it make you think of?
Noah's Ark.
Oh, okay.
The animals, twosies. Yeah. So yeah, we've got this tie back to Noah's Ark.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And you gotta remember the animals for Noah's Ark, they were captured in pairs to save the animals. It was as an act of kindness.
Mm-hmm. Samson
is totally turning that on its head. And now these are animals that are being used as weapons of war to their own destruction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to save the animals. So Samson is not acting like an Israelite even at this level. He actually has more ties with Enkidu, which from the Epic of Gilgamesh at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because the animals help Enkidu, but Enkidu actually winds up losing their loyalty when he becomes domesticated. So the point of the story is Samson is acting like a Canaanite. He's acting like a Philistine. And we're not supposed to applaud this. We're not supposed to think that this is a great story. I don't care how you've heard it told. We're supposed to be horrified.
Right.
And I don't think it's presented that way. So when he sends the jackals out, and this is verse 5, into the grain, what you've got to remember is you used all the land.
Yeah.
You didn't have, here's my olive grove, and here's my wheat field, and here's my vineyard. It would all be used together. So this would have been, the grain would have been growing among the olive trees. It would have been growing among the grapes.
Mm-hmm.
So when he burns down the grain, he's impacting their entire harvest.
Yeah. And the fact that it is harvest season, the wheat stalks are going to be dry.
Exactly. And that's why it's important that first verse. So when you get that little clue, time of the wheat harvest, he remembers he has a wife.
Mm-hmm.
Now we get all the way back to the foxes, and you understand why that phrase was put in there.
Mm-hmm. And
so when you're reading the Bible, when you see those little clues, that's where you stop and you go, Why is this important?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? Now, the scripture also specifies that he set fire to the sack grain. So he is really trying to wipe them out.
Yeah. Not just the fields,
Mm-hmm.
but the reserves.
Yeah. And he's acting alone. And now this is where another point of debate comes in. Is he acting alone because he is attempting to make sure that he's the only one that the Philistines would retaliate against? Or is he acting alone because this really is a personal vendetta? Is he protecting Israel by having these personal reasons to attack the Philistines? Or I don't...
I mean, well, or the other side of it is like you mentioned previously, is no one else wants to upset the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Do they not realize that they're being ruled over by the Philistines is a bad thing?
They don't seem to. But at the same time, Samson doesn't seem sophisticated enough to try, or is selfless enough to say, okay, I'm going to do something for my country. I'm going to do this for another person. All of his words are very narcissistic. And so I think we have to pay attention to what the text actually presents us and not try to make this prettier.
Mm.
And I think because we're going to talk about this a lot later, we have so many touch points with the story of Christ that we want Samson to be pretty. And that it doesn't matter what we want.
And I wasn't saying that my thing wasn't, it wasn't that he was trying to protect anybody. My thought was just like, nobody wants to go with him. Like nobody wants.
Nobody went to his wedding.
Well, it's like, nobody wants to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to be told that, oh, you're in the wrong. You should not be doing this. And so here he is upsetting things, and the people are going, but no, we've got a good thing going.
Well, the tribe of Judah, when they come to him, don't you know that the Philistines rule over us? You're just supposed to accept this.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think people are wanting to join with him, but I also think, he's not calling them to join with them. He doesn't have this vision for the future that God has for Israel. He's so bound up in what he wants in that moment. Forget this grand idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about what feeds me, what serves me.
And it's like, could things have been different, and should they have been different for him to go and call on the people and remind them of who the Lord is? Because we have throughout the book, we've got prophets going to judges and judges going to the people, and here we don't have that. There's not a prophetic voice, nor is there
precisely,
nor is the judge going to the people.
Well, and this should be troubling actually in Samson's story, because God has not spoken to Samson at all by this point.
Right.
Not one little bit. And when God's silent, there's usually trouble ahead. Mm. And so, and I think that's the other tip off that we get, that God doesn't necessarily approve of all this stuff because God is silent. And if God did approve, then why wasn't he speaking? I mean, you go back to Deborah, who really is the last judge of any kind of moral character. She is giving direct quotes from God. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that she is giving direct quotes, we know that God is speaking to her.
Right.
And we really don't have that. Gideon, we have a little bit at the beginning, but once he starts to strike out on his own and exceed what God has commanded him to do, God stops talking to him. Mm. God doesn't talk to Abimelech, and he doesn't talk to Jephthah. So the fact that he's not talking to Samson now should make us aware this is not going to be a happy ending.
Right.
And so the writer is really using all of the tools and tricks of a good writer to set us up to have the proper expectations.
Right.
And because, when you write, you want to set some expectations up, and some of them you want to kind of subvert and do a little plot twist, but sometimes you really need to cash in and let the reader get that satisfaction. And if this was just a novel, we would get that satisfaction. Mm. But it's more than a novel, and we need to be disturbed by the story.
Yeah.
So, but when Samson's done this, the Philistines, they come back and they say, who's done this? And we're right back at Gideon. We're right back, when Gideon tears down that shrine for Baal, we can see the parallels here.
Okay.
And somebody, an unidentified they, says that it's Samson. But they identify Samson as the son-in-law of the Timnite. This is verse 6 in chapter 15. And so they acknowledge that Samson has a legitimate grievance. He's the son-in-law of the Timnite who's been denied his bride, is pretty much what is being said here. Mm-hmm. And they expect Samson to what's the words I'm looking for? They understand why Samson did what he did. And they decide to do something very interesting. I thought this was really bizarre. They don't retaliate against Samson.
Right.
They actually go to the Timnite, Samson's father-in-law, and they
burn them.
Yeah, they burn the house. So the fate that the wife was trying to avoid still happens. Mm-hmm. And
now my question though is, at this point, was it the younger daughter, or was it the one or the older daughter? Because it's not real clear in the text which one it is.
Most of the commentators assume that it was the oldest daughter, that it was the one who had tried to avoid being burned. And so we've got that little flip that's so common with the writer and Judges.
Sure. And I mean, that would make sense, but I just want to throw that. I couldn't, unless I just wasn't paying too close attention. It didn't seem like the text was clear as to which one it was.
It's not.
Which makes me wonder, because then I kind of wonder, is it that they took the older daughter away and gave her to Samson, or did he accept the younger daughter? Because he is called the son-in-law,
right?
So at some level, there's some kind of recognition.
Well, most commentators agree that he rejected the second daughter and just flat out never took her. And so I was going to look.
But I mean. I'm just curious. So I would guess, since most commentators agree that that's probably who it's supposed to be.
Oh yeah, I was looking to see who they said burnt. Burned her. But this is verse 6. The Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." So that's the woman they're talking about. It's the wife that was given to the companion.
Right.
And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with his companion.
Okay.
So
right.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. You kind of have to stop and look, because sometimes, and we're going to talk about that, who does the pronoun apply to? That's one of the problems with Hebrew.
Right.
And you really have to kind of pick that apart. And we see that particularly when we get to the Levite and the concubine. That's one of the problems with that story is there's a question, who did what? And it comes down to, how do you parse the pronouns?
Okay. Well, that's going to be real interesting.
Oh, yeah.
We're still a few weeks out on that one.
Yeah, because, Samson, he gets himself into a lot of trouble before he gets out of it.
And he never gets out of it.
No, he doesn't.
To be
fair. He doesn't. But one of the things to point out here, too, is we're right back at Jotham's story. Fire is met with fire. Samson set their fields on fire. They burn the bride and her father. So we're remembering Jotham at this point. Mm-hmm. So the writer he has created so many layers and levels throughout this book, and I'm just stunned by. You don't think of the Bible as being a piece of literature and art, but really this whole book, once you realize how it's put together, you see that it is an artistic work.
Yeah, and what's really funny is when we started Judges, something was said about Samson, and you're like, yeah, we'll probably just breeze through that real fast. Everybody knows that story.
I really did. I expected to, but the deeper you dig, it's crazy. So, but I'm fascinated and appalled by him, and I actually do have one moment where I do feel some sorrow for him, but we aren't there yet. So,
so we'll continue to harp on him.
Yeah, continue. Yeah. Well, so much positive stuff has been said. I feel like it's our duty to bring some balance back to so if we're unbalanced, it's because everybody else has been unbalanced. It's not our fault. We're taking a lesson from Samson.
Okay.
Okay. So, but, Samson, instead of being like thrilled that the Philistines have taken his side, the Philistines are going to try to dispense justice on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
He gets mad. Once again, it's like he's always looking for an excuse to get mad. I got mad because my riddle was solved. I got mad because you gave my wife away. I got mad because I didn't want your younger daughter. And now you punish the man that I was mad at, and I'm mad at you for punishing him. I mean, he is there anything that's going to make this man happy? It is kind of the question you're left with by the time you go through all of these different events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so once again, we're asking that question: is this really Samson? Or is this God seeking that opportunity, or is it the two of it coming together?
Mm-hmm.
So, verse 7 is interesting because it says, if this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. So this is Samson talking. Now, vengeance is part of the biblical narrative.
Right.
It's established in Genesis 9, verses 5 and 6. This is the institution of the death penalty for murderers after Noah's Ark. That if you destroy the image of God, then you're going to be destroyed is pretty much what it boils down to.
Right.
Numbers 35, 19 through 27, Deuteronomy 19, 6 through 12. It's how to deal with murders versus accidental deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to figure out what do you do when somebody may have killed someone, but it wasn't intentional. And there's provision for that under law. And so,
what do you do when your axe blade flies off the handle?
Precisely. And those are some interesting things to read. So again, in the show notes, we'll have all the scripture verses. So Samson, in some ways, he's seeing this as his right to avenge his bride who has been killed. So in some ways, he's correct.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he just possibly starved hundreds of people to death. And he seems to think that's okay. So by destroying these crops, he's not just hurting one or two people. I mean, he's hurting children. He's hurting women. He's hurting. And so he never understands how what he's doing is what's causing the problems. And he just thinks that, somebody hurt me, so I need to be able to hurt him back. You're talking about that 3-year-old mentality. I mean, it's right there.
Sure. Yeah.
So he kind of sees himself above the law, and not just above the Torah, but even above the Philistine law, because the Philistines had dispensed justice on his behalf, and they don't care. I mean, he doesn't care. It's not good enough. So, but being above the law, I think we kind of expect that from a man who sees himself as supernatural.
Right.
And I mean, look at the news today, and who's above the law, and who can get by with what, and who can bribe who, and we still deal with this mindset in almost every circle, social, political, entertainment wise.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'll discuss political theories all day long with people off mic,
right?
As long as it's a discussion, but I won't really defend any single one as the way to go anymore, because it's every political theory, every political system can work if you do one thing: remove all the corruption. Right.
Well, that means you got to remove all the corrupt people.
Exactly.
And since that's all of us,
so, but that's all. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Now, what I think is most interesting about this verse is at the very end, he's like, after that, I will quit. It's like, if he can just be the one to make the final blow, then everybody else has to quit too.
Right.
This is how powerful he thinks he is. And it's a very telling statement that he thinks that the Philistines would have to acknowledge that he's done. So they have to be done. But I mean, this is the childhood squabble. I just hit her because she hit me, and now she needs to quit.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line? And that's the problem, I think, with every human interaction, where you get into that cycle of paybacks.
Yeah, and then it just escalates and escalates and escalates.
Yeah. Yeah, and there really is no stopping it. And I think that's what Samson's story in the end, we're going to see that this escalation that he could have put a halt to at any point in here.
Mm-hmm.
All he had to do was calm himself just a little bit, but yet he refuses to. And it winds up causing, it takes his life.
Mm-hmm.
It literally takes his life. And I think that's one of the messages we're supposed to get out of this, that vengeance is not ours to get.
Right.
So, but verse 8, it says that he struck them hip and thigh. And this is a really weird line because we never find it it's not used anywhere else.
Right.
Rashi says it means he attacks foot soldiers and riders. So the difference in height, the foot and thigh, it could just refer to a great slaughter. Robert Bowling, he says it's a tangle of legs and thighs, so that he was like made this heap of bodies is pretty much what he's seeing. And when he does this, he goes down once more. So we're continuing with that downward spiral. But he seeks, after he attacks the Philistines, there's really not a lot of detail given other than that foot and thigh, whatever that means.
Okay.
He seeks out a place to hide in the cleft of the rock at Edom. And now we've got connections to Elijah, we got connections to David, we got connections to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is with all of these guys, Elijah, David, and Moses, they know that they're in the fight of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
They know that they're in the middle of a battle. Samson thinks his is over.
Right.
He's going there to rest. They were going there to hide or to get spiritual instruction, particularly with Moses. But that Samson, he's just done. It's
right.
time to take a nap. I mean, that's pretty much what it amounts to. And, there's been no intervention in any of this by God to sustain him. This has all been Samson's power coming through, his strength being on display, as opposed to some kind of miraculous event. This is just Samson being Samson to accomplish everything that's happened to this point. And we kind of expect, since he is hiding in the cleft of the rock, I mean, we have the songs that talk about the cleft of the rock. We know this is supercharged spiritual place, but we this is where we expect God to show up. Mm-hmm. We expect God to see something to Samson now, but there's silence.
Yeah, even there's silence. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we should start to feel uncomfortable as a reader because there is so much silence. And we should.
Well, it's a similar kind of device that you'd see in a movie where someone goes into a church.
Right.
And you see everyone, they go into the confession booth to talk to the priest, and the priest is, doesn't give them the advice they need to hear in the movie, or it's that kind of thought. Or you go to the altar and then you don't
pour out your heart, and
and there's no response, and so that's kind of what I was thinking of when you're talking about it's a sacred place.
I think it's a good image,
and so that's kind of where we are in the story, I think.
Yeah, we're waiting as readers. We want God. We're hoping God's going to show up, because if God doesn't show up, we know there's going to be trouble. And so that's where Samson is. We're still waiting for some kind of sign that God's going to intervene and set him back on the right course. He's going to, redeem this man before it's too late. And, of course, by saying all this, I'm asking, listeners to kind of say, okay, I haven't read the story yet, to actually pretend like they don't know where it's going.
Right.
And that's a good way to read it sometimes, especially when it is a story that we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. Stop knowing the ending and just let yourself take the journey with the words.
Yeah, well, like Heiser is fond of saying, read the Bible as like you would read a novel. Mm-hmm. Don't read it like it's something you have to study. Read it like you're actually reading it.
Yeah.
Which takes some time, especially, again, the number of verse separations.
Yeah, and there are translations out there that don't have that, and I think it'd be fun to get that and see if how much that would impact my own reading.
Right.
So I'm not there. I haven't done it yet because I have a ton of reading. But
sure.
in verses 9 and 10, the Philistines, they realize they've got to do something about Samson. Samson is a problem for them. He's killed 30 men in Ashkelon. He's destroyed crops. And now he's had this massive confrontation with more Philistines. And they prepare to attack Lehi. They're interested. It's interesting because the name's used here, but it's not going to be named that till verse 17. Okay. So we're a little foreshadowing that something's on the horizon with the story. And now this city, it's a city of Judah, and it had been part of Dan. And Samson, it's a city of Judah. There's Dan and Judah kind of have this really weird relationship where they kind of coexist in the same places. And we're going to talk about Dan's situation because Dan's land allotment and whether or not they actually fully possess it is going to play into the last part of Judges after Samson. And Samson is from the tribe of Dan, and he's a judge here, but like I said, just a weird kind of tension between the two tribes.
Sure.
And so we're going to, like I said, more on that later. But Judah, they're like, wait a minute. There's Philistines. They're coming into our country. They're coming into our land. We need to figure out what's going on here. Guys, hold up. Let's talk. And so they go out to the Philistines and they talk to them. And it's very telling that they didn't expect to be attacked by the Philistines. These are the oppressors God had sent into their land as punishment. So why are they not scared?
Well, I think it's to the point of, it sounds like it's to the point of just general occupation. It's not there. It's to the point where they're not even fighting back. They're just like, okay, you can live here.
Yeah, I mean, what we should expect, I think, though, is either fear or resistance to the Philistines coming in. Because evidently there was still some kind of separation. There were Philistine towns and there were Israelite towns. They might exist side by side. And, obviously Samson goes back and forth between all of them and nobody cares. But I think when you see that, an army coming to your town of somebody who is your oppressor, which probably means that they took part of the crops, they expected some kind of payment. They probably gathered up whatever women they wanted.
It's a bug's life.
Pretty much. Yeah. So I know it took me a minute because I don't have kids.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. The grasshoppers are coming for their tax or whatever they.
Pretty much. And yeah. And so Judah just, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And the Philistines said, we have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. So this is the first mention, number one, of the Philistines' obsession with binding Samson.
Right.
This is going to be a recurring theme.
Okay.
It's a perversion of the golden rule. In this case, it's do unto others as they do unto you, or before they can do unto you. Yeah. Samson very much operating by the same mentality.
Yeah.
And, this is the savior of Israel. And this is the theology and the moral ethic that he's giving to the people, that I will do what you do to me. So again, big problems with Samson.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you don't want to, it's like a counter, almost a counter. I don't want to say Antichrist because that has really bad connotations, but it's like a counter.
Christ.
Like counter character. He's very antithetical to the behavior and the teachings of Jesus.
It is that subversive retelling that turns everything on its head. And Samson, in this case, he would be the foundational story, and Christ's story would be the subversive.
Sure.
And so, Christ's story moves us beyond that. And we're going to talk about that in the upcoming episode too, because I want to discuss the similarities between Samson and Jesus, but I want to talk about the differences because it's a huge point that gets talked about a lot.
Right. Well, yeah, because Samson does get set up in a lot of stories as a type of of the deliverer to come, and it's really difficult to really make that that make that claim. So.
Well, I think, ultimately with all of our Bible heroes, we go back to what we keep saying. No one person is the hero.
Right.
It's not about how great are these believers. It's the fact that they are so flawed and God loves them. He uses them anyway. And this gives us hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about how great anyone is. It's about how great God's love for us is. And I think until we really grab hold of that, that's where we run into problems and making ourselves crazy trying to be good enough and trying, we go one of two ways. We either try to be good enough and we wear ourselves out and get frustrated, or we give up.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't find that balance. And so that I think that's where we as Christians, we're trying to find that balance of how do we receive grace and how do we walk in grace without neglecting or honoring that grace through our actions. So, we want to receive the grace, but we still want to be obedient. But It's not about earning. It's about celebrating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But okay, sorry. I went on a rabbit trail there. So
no, I didn't mean to cut you off. That made sense.
That's where I'm at. So, but we can continue with Samson a little further. And I totally, his story is just crazy. So talking about one of those connections with Jesus, the tribe of Judah sends 3,000 guys after Samson. This is verse 11. And it's not the Philistines going after Samson.
Right.
It's his own people. And he's hiding. Their response to him is, don't you know that they rule over us? Yeah, that we've just accepted it. We aren't going to try to fight it anymore. And you need to quit causing problems. You've just got to accept this is the way things are. And it's a messed up situation because Judah is talking to the guy that God specifically created in order to deliver Israel from the Philistines. And so the Philistines shouldn't be saying, hey, you need to stop. They should be saying, hey, here's your army. We're ready to go to war. Mm-hmm. Lead us against these great oppressors. Instead, they're saying, yeah, you're causing us problems. We don't like it. And Samson, he's not standing up either. So, we've got this, nobody's doing what they were supposed to do, and nobody's inhabiting the role that they're supposed to be inhabiting. And nobody's being responsible. They're all expecting somebody else to take over and do the right thing. And really, at this point, they kind of don't care if anyone does the right thing as long as it doesn't cause them problems.
Right.
So
it's kind of human nature in a lot of ways. We just want to do our thing. We don't want to have to invest. We don't want to have to give. I mean, it's like, in it, not even in just moral things, talking to, we interviewed with Justin Westmoreland, and we talked about that, how we have to have that accountability because we don't want to.
We're lazy.
We don't want to spend time working under resistance.
Yeah.
To use the workout terms, that it's just time under tension is what he says. That's what builds muscle, and that's and that's kind of how we operate morally too.
Oh, we're so lazy, and I'm guilty of it too. And I'm not going to say that I'm not. I hope that I'm not to the level that I would go out and grab the deliverer of our country and say, "Here, I'm going to give you to the enemy." And of course, we see that there's definitely connection there with Christ, and when being in the garden and Judas and the kiss. I mean, it's the same thing, and it's not by accident that we have Judas and Judah. We're supposed to be having that connection. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
I
hadn't put that together, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I was thinking I need to look up what tribe was Judas from. I'm not certain about that one, but it would be these little threads they run throughout the Bible. And that's the reason when people say, "How do you know that the Bible is an inspired book and it's not just something somebody made up?" You can't. Nobody's as smart.
Right.
Nobody can write something over this length of time with so many different authors and everybody creating the same themes over and over again in new ways.
Right.
And, how many times have we talked about a story on here and people...
How's it going over there? So, how many times what?
But the stories we tell, excuse me, we tell stories and we show how they're connected, but people don't realize they were connected until it's pointed out to you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once you see it, it's like, well, duh.
Yeah. Once you see it, like Judah and Judas, and again, these are the parts of the story we tend to skip in Sunday school, like this section. It's not interesting to.
Yeah. Well,
to kids.
You've got to get into that nitty gritty really to kind of pick out it's like a black walnut. If you've ever cracked one of those, you have to really dig around in there to find the parts to eat.
Yeah.
And that's what these parts of the Bible are really like. You got to crack it open. You've got to be willing to stick with it. And once you find that really good bite, then you're hooked. And you want to keep going back for more and more. And that's the way it is for me in these Bible stories. It's like, what else can I find? And there'll be times I'll read something and I'll go, I'm missing something. And because I don't find that counterpart in the other parts of the scriptures that I want to play with that specific text.
Right.
And so I'm to the point now that if I'm not finding it, I get really disappointed and really frustrated. So I'm always looking for it. But that's neither here nor there, because when we get back to Samson real quick, Samson's response in this, he says, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." This is his response to the Judites coming to grab him. They deserved it.
Yeah.
I mean, he again not acknowledging. If he hadn't wanted the Philistine wife, if he had listened to his parents, if he had not set the fox's tails on fire, if he had not, all of this stuff, he just thinks that he has a right to do this, and nobody has a right to come back against him.
Right.
So the Judites, this is verse 12 and 13, they say that they've come to bind him and hand him over to the Philistines. And this is the one point where I can say I see some similarity with Samson's story and Jesus' story. Samson lets them.
Yeah.
He makes them promise that they're not going to kill him themselves because he doesn't want to be killed by his countrymen. But that's it. He lets them go, and they bind him with ropes. And again, this is the tip off. We need to have this in mind, because when we move forward to Lila, we know that she's going to bind him with ropes. And of course, we're reading it and we're going, that's not going to work.
Right.
I mean, right. We get it. So there's this crazy thing going on with Samson here that for a moment he's submissive. And it's in this moment of submission that he gets to the Philistines. And if you'll notice in verse 19, I'm sorry, I'll make sure it's the right one. This is 14 through 19 is what I've got notes written. Helps if I'm in the right chapter.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, and when they came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting, verses 14, yes. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. Samson doesn't break them.
Right.
God actually shows up. It's in this moment of submission that God shows up and frees him.
Okay.
So he needs to be learning something here, that when he is willing to lay down his life for his brothers, when he's willing to participate as part of the culture, even though the culture's wrong, but he wasn't going to kill his countrymen. He was willing to sacrifice himself on their behalf so the Philistines didn't overrun them. And then God shows up, and he shows up miraculously. He doesn't just let Samson do what Samson does.
Right.
This is like the first time that God is actually moving on Samson's behalf. And that's going to be like the only episode where you go, oh yeah, he got it right. And so then he picks up the jawbone of the donkey, and it's the fresh jawbone. So this,
dead animal,
grisly weapon. If it's a fresh jawbone, I mean, you've got the dried one up there.
For our YouTube video, we do have a donkey jawbone here. You can see that could hurt somebody.
Yeah. Well, and okay, now here's a matter of debate. Because one commentary would say, oh, it was fresh, so it wasn't brittle, and so it made a better weapon. Others said, oh, it was fresh, so it wasn't hardened, so it wouldn't be a great weapon. And there's...
I don't know. I still
Can I
think
hit you with this and find out?
No.
I mean...
I still think regardless, because, I mean, it's basically, when it curves up here, now on this one, the ball joints have been removed from, like, the upper ball joints have been removed.
Yeah.
So it would actually be kind of like a shillelagh where it has a club end on it. So, yeah,
Yeah, because you'd probably grab down by the teeth and just whack. We're thinking way too much about this.
So, well, it helps that we have one here to examine. So, if you ever want to see what these look like, we'll post some pictures on Facebook too. So anyway, but I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Good place to stop. Okay.
And then we'll pick up next week and figure out what he did with the donkey jawbone and what that means. So
exactly.
Anyway, everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll be back with more donkey talk.
Or talking donkeys.
No, that's a different story.
Oh, okay. Or it's us.
It might be. Who knows? So, so we'll be back next week. If you want to be part of the conversation, hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Raven Creek SC is where you'll find us. If you want to see pictures of the donkey jawbone that I have here, or you can Google image, I guess, if you want to later. It's up to you. If you want to find our show notes and everything, you can find those at ravencreeksc.com, where you also find other shows that we have going on in the crazy Raven Creek mix. So,
yeah.
Anyway, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
You've been listening to the Faith and Other Oddities podcast, a Raven Creek Social Club production. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you like what you've heard, please write us a review on iTunes or consider supporting us on patreon.com/RavenCreekSC. As always, thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us next week.